Welcome back. The question of what to do with sex offenders and where to put them once they're released from prison is something of really an age-old debate here that nobody's got a good answer for. Some say, hey, they've done their time, now they got to go back into society. Others say, time out. These are not just regular ex-cons here. They pose a threat to those around them, especially children. Now, it's because of the latter argument that we have laws that specify where convicted sex offenders can live after they've done their time. Now, after the 1994 killing of Mega Kanka at the hands of a neighbor who was a convicted sex offender, New York State passed, as you all know, Megan's Law. Now, these laws, they require sex offenders to register with local authorities and made way for certain residency restrictions. Suffolk County in eastern Long Island, they've taken some particularly controversial steps. And Andrew, you've been looking at this because nobody wants to defend this population here, but the net consequences of this in such tiny areas they can live, it creates almost unintended consequences.
And it's a combination of different rules that are all meant with the best of intentions that are leading to some questionable results, Rich. Suffolk County has passed laws that bar convicted sex offenders from living near schools, near daycare centers, and other places where children are prone to be. That has led to this. These trailers in Southampton, a town known for beaching and suntanning, house about 40 convicted rapists, sexual predators, and child abusers who have been released from prisons. The regulations are so restrictive that some offenders find it difficult to find housing, leaving many of them homeless. And that's not just an issue for the offenders themselves, but also for the people around them. The trailers, which were supposed to be temporary, were installed when officials found that sex offenders were living in cheap motel rooms, sometimes right near families with children. The, quote, temporary solution was put in place 6 years ago. County Executive Steve Bellone had vowed to remove the trailers by January 1st. That deadline has since passed. But last night, a solution was finally approved. The Suffolk County Legislature passing an emergency bill that supporters call the toughest monitoring and enforcement program in the nation. 5's 1's Tamani Woolley was there when the legislation passed.
The Suffolk County Legislature voted unanimously to pass the controversial Community Protection Act on Tuesday. The emergency bill allows Suffolk police to aggressively monitor convicted sex offenders and closes the county-financed East End trailers where 40 homeless offenders are currently living.
This particular plan takes the sex offenders, puts them in appropriate shelters, and it's an overall plan to monitor not just these sex offenders, but the other 968 that are in Suffolk County.
It's a comprehensive plan that promises to increase registration compliance, and when we increase registration compliance, we decrease the number of sex crimes that are committed.
Jody Giglio of Riverhead spoke out in support of the bill that was sponsored by County Executive Steve Bellone.
I have a 10-year-old and I have twins that are 9 that attend school within a couple of miles of the sex offender trailers.
The bill calls for the Suffolk County Police Department to work with parents from Megan's Law to increase the enforcement of convicted sex offenders registering their current address. Also increase frequency of address checks, the development of smartphone apps to report suspected violations, and putting registered offenders in non-family shelters after closing the trailers. In Hauppauge, Tamani Woolley, 5's 1 News.
Now, an interesting aspect of the law is that it allows police to contract a nonprofit organization called Parents for Megan's Law to intensify their checks on Suffolk County's registered sex offenders. The organization will check offenders' addresses in person and develop smartphone applications. They'll be used to report registration violations. Suffolk police officers will also visit offenders' homes to try and verify their addresses. Rich?
Thank you very much, Andrew. We're now pleased to be joined by Laura Ahearn. She's Executive Director of Parents for Megan's Law. Laura, thank you for a few minutes. I appreciate it.
Hi, Rich. How you doing?
I'm good, thanks. Let me ask you, because your group has long been cited as one of the folks on the front lines here looking out for victims of, obviously, abuse at the hands of sex offenders. But to the naked eye, it just seems that you guys who are advocates are now being asked in many ways to act as law enforcement. It seems to put you guys in the position of doing the work that the cops either can't do or won't do.
Actually, I think it's more, Rich, about being able to more comprehensively verify addresses. In other states, say, for example, in Maryland, there's a sheriff's office that hires retired law enforcement to do address verifications, because what we've found statistically is that sex offenders that are complying with registration have lower rates of recidivism. So what law enforcement is doing is basically contracting out with an organization that is going to hire retired law enforcement officers to do the door-to-door address verifications.
You know that there has been some criticism of how this came about, or it was really a rushed move here, and that there's $2.7 million of taxpayer money that's over 3 years going to go to your group. But families of sex offenders say, hey, we get it, you got to monitor this population, but the wrong people are doing the monitoring. In fact, USA Fair says this equates to basically state-sanctioned vigilantism. I'm going to read a quote here from this group, USA Fair, and I want your response. They say, you, Laura Ahearn, has shown herself to be a strident ideologue on sex offender issues, not open to dialogue with the former offender community and their family members. USA Fair has repeatedly tried to get her to take down misleading stats from her organization's website, and she has failed to even respond to requests. Our only conclusion is that the big lie of high recidivism serves her agenda and her finances. They're saying, Laura, that you got an agenda here, and you got an agenda here, and now you got to have the power to enact it. How do you respond?
Well, you know, everybody's entitled to their position. The organization has worked for 17 years to provide the community across our country an opportunity to be educated about how to access sex offender registration information, prevention education, ultimately to prevent sex crimes, and also to ensure that information that is accessed by the public is used responsibly. So really what I would say is that the organization has a long history of being responsible with information and providing valuable services to crime victims, and to ensure that that information that goes out to the community is used to open up a dialogue about how to prevent sex crimes in the first place.
Laura, where are we going to put all these people? You got more than 1,000 by at least the reporting numbers that we have, and there's the idea that you're going to separate them so you don't put more than one of them in certain shelters. People just say we don't have the beds for them, let alone the locations that'll take them. Is there an issue of where you're going to house this population?
Well, you know, Rich, there's never a perfect plan, because when the sex offenders were in a trailer in one location, they were clustered. And advocates had concern about the clustering, and sex offenders had concern about the clustering. I mean, that wasn't our concern. The concern is public safety. So what's going to happen here is those registered 38 offenders out of Suffolk County's 1,000 are going to be put in shelters across the county, and there will only be one sex offender per location, and additional patrol checks will be established to ensure those offenders are where they said they were going to be. So they will be dispersed throughout the county. And, you know, there is no perfect plan. If we put them in one location, then there's always going to be individuals that are going to complain about that. And then where do you put that one location? So like the other 1,000 sex offenders in the county, they will be dispersed, and they will be required to register under the law just like everybody else. And law enforcement will verify their addresses, and retired law enforcement staff from the agency will verify that the other offenders are providing their addresses as required by law.
Laura Ahearn, thank you so much for a few minutes. And again, it's with the Parents for Megan's Law and Crime Victims. I appreciate the time.
Sure. Thanks, Rich.
All right. Dom, this one's tough. Nobody wants to, no politician wants to be seen as trying to work hard for this, but basically what Suffolk County did was they said a couple days ago, you know what, we wash our hands of it. We don't have the budget to be following these guys around here, so do your best, county or this organization. And then finally, the blowback was like, well, time out. You can't just outsource to the general public. They hastily put this thing together, this group that seems to be a terrific group here. They're being asked to do it, but it's rife with potential problems. But honestly, I don't have a better solution.
I don't either. And let's be honest about it. Does anybody at this table want a sex offender living next door to them? I know I don't.
No.
I don't.
Nope.
Not around my children. And this is a societal problem that's got to be dealt with. What I'm concerned about, though, and I mean, sex offenders have rights too. They violated a great trust, but they have rights as well. And so you're going to have this group in charge of them where you know where their position is. And thus they may be violated of their conditions, I mean, like that. And that's a question of whether it's fair or not.
It does feel that the county should be employing social workers and physicians and nurses to monitor this population, as well as law enforcement. But if there are families living in motels near sex offenders that are recently released from prison, the issue is not just about the sex offenders, but why the families with children are living in motels.
But that's
so the overall economic
problem.
Well, you know, if we could grapple with the issue of poverty here, then we could tackle sex offenders. But it's they're not unrelated.
Somebody once said, and I think they're right, if we said we changed our sentencing guidelines to say, you sexually assault a kid, you never walk out of prison for the rest of your life, I don't think too many people would have a huge opposition to that, right? However, that's not the reality. That's not what happens, and they get out of prison.
I know, but Richard, but there's also another reality. Not everyone convicted of a sex crime or is a sex offender, meaning that it could be, it's not all involving children.
Well, I'm saying there's different classifications. Right, absolutely.
You get the 19-year-old with a 16-year-old.
Okay. You always use that one, but that's a sliver of a percent.
But here's another sliver of a percent, because this, to my mind, is an unintended consequence of people trying to do the right thing and trying to be helpful, because nobody wants to hear the headlines that we hear, which are horrible stories, and we want to try to prevent them as best we can. So we institute all these laws that I'm not sure we need necessarily, which is, you know, we keep them basically under lock and key even after we let them out of prison. Here's just 2 minutes of research. The recidivism rate for criminals in the United States, about 52%. The recidivism for sex crime offenders is about 5%. So we make a very big deal over what's actually less of a problem because the headlines are so graphic and so terrible. And, you know, I understand nobody wants to let this happen to them. But in trying to protect ourselves from those bad headlines, we run into all of these different problems. And you know, it's costing us money. We're treating people in a way that...
The reality is we're not going to live in a world or in a country where we're going to treat these guys as regular ex-cons. They did something so horrific, especially those who not only assaulted a child, but even those who raped another person, that the idea that if they go to reoffend and we didn't do everything we could, we're past that. That debate has long since ceased. The only problem that I have is, well-intended, as Andrew said, to create all these boxes where they can and can't live. The easiest thing to do is, as a lawmaker, have a press release and have a press conference and say, I've now decided they can't live here anymore. The net conclusion is you have two trailers stuck together where you got 40 of them living basically together, which I don't think anybody thinks is a good idea, right next to, you know, so I don't know that there's an answer to this one, but I just know, to Andrew's point, we haven't come across the right solution yet.
It's also a consequence of technology and the access to this information. Sex offenders have always been present. They've gone to prison often, and they often get out of prison.
Worse than we
but now you could get this information online, whereas before you needed to go through a lot of different hoops in order to get it.
How about reintroducing judges' discretion on this, which is something that we get away from? Have it be done on a case-by-case basis. Some people are worse than others and probably shouldn't come out from behind bars. Let a judge determine that. Let a judge determine who needs counseling and who needs supervision with that intensity.
But that becomes political, because who wants to be the judge where you gave the guy a break and he just committed the crime again?
These are legitimate functions of government that are being outsourced to advocacy and nonprofit groups, and they should be government functions.
And that is the easy way out. That much I think we can agree on the way they're doing it. All right, keep this conversation going online. Go to Facebook and Twitter and sound off. Where should sex offenders go after being released from prison here? We'd love your perspective. All right, we take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to turn to the issue of stop and frisk. There's new numbers out from the NYPD, and they confirm what a lot of folks have suspected here, that 9 in 10 people singled out, well, those people are people of color. We're going to hear from a city councilman who's going to tell you what he thinks ought to be done about it. That's up next.